Hey, this is Nick from Kinetic. Thanks for checking out our series from the floor. Like I always say, one of our goals at Kinetic is improving the level of education in the industry. So we're putting out this series to highlight different brokers and to give some quick hitting tips on best practices, common mistakes, general brokering advice. Today, I've got Gabe from Rocket Shipping. Gabe, thanks for being on. Do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, man. I own a company called Rocket Shipping. We specialize in LTL shipping. Specifically within LTL, we specialize in residential home delivery, curbside, anything that's being sold online that's got to ship to a house that is too big or too bulky or awkward size. So UPS and FedEx won't take it. We ship that. We run the customer service on it, and we specialize in that niche.
All right, man. And today, like you said, we're talking about LTL pricing. Kind of a nuance to it, blanket pricing versus customer specific pricing. I know just enough about LTL to get myself in trouble. So I'm going to shut up more than usual during this conversation and let you do the talking. So like, what do each of those terms mean?
Well, when you're talking blanket versus CSP, a blanket pricing, traditionally speaking, there is some nuance, but a blanket pricing would be like, hey, we have all of these customers, they ship X amount of freight and they spend X million dollars per year. Will you, XPO, RNL, FedEx, Saia, Old Dominion, national carriers, right? Will you national carriers give us a blanket rate that kind of covers all kinds of commodities, all kinds of accessorials, and we'll just ship under that one tariff for a bunch of our customers? That's a lot of the third-party industry is built on blankets. So all of the top 5, top 10, top 20 3PLs have blanket rates. There used to be a bunch of separation in those blanket rates, and over the last 2 years, they're really within 5% of each other. The carriers have put them into what is called a 3PL channel. So you have a 3PL channel, you manage those relationships, and you give blanket rates per carrier to these third parties. A CSP would be what the third-party industry, us brokers, refer to as something that's a tariff that's specific to a customer's freight profile. So that could be a customer who ships toolboxes or couches or anything of the like, engines. And you say, hey, our blanket rate is based off of all kinds of commodities, and there's all kinds of risk baked into that for the carrier. So let's show the carrier exactly what we have, how it's packaged, what it looks like, how dense it is, and see if we can get a more attractive, tariff for our freight. And so that would be a CSP tariff.
Okay. On the CSP side, do you ever get pushback asking customers for that kind of disclosure about their freight, or is it pretty commonplace?
No, I think we get more pushback than most would imagine, because it's a trust level. In order to procure a CSP for a client of ours, we have to get them to sign what we call an LOA form, a letter of authority, letter of authorization. They kind of go hand in hand. Most of those LOAs are exclusive agreements saying, hey, I give authority to this third party or this broker to negotiate on my behalf. That's because the carriers make us do it that way. That's not actually exclusive. It happens quite often that a client will have enough freight that they'll have several brokers go to bid for them and sign multiple LOAs. It's really just a piece of paper that says, hey, we can go to the carrier and get a bid that's better than a blanket, or try to.
Okay.
But shippers certainly have some hesitancy with that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it must be easier to do that with like exclusively an LTL shipper as opposed to like a full truckload shipper who kind of has an LTL segment of their business.
I think so. I think some of the bigger spends for truckload don't care about LTL nearly as much. And so they might just sign it and say, do what you want with it. But at the same time, they might say, hey, we don't want to sign anything. We're fine with the rates we have, or we're fine as long as you manage it. They're less price conscious if they have a large truckload spend, in my experience. Now, if you're talking to a traffic manager, I don't think they would say that, but that is the reality.
Yeah, probably not. So what are the advantages of blanket pricing versus CSP pricing?
Blanket pricing is steady. That's what I always call it, right? Year after year, you're going to get a cost of living increase, a GRI. It doesn't always hit the blankets, but every year there's an increase. As you know, in some cycles, you get a decrease on a blanket, but it's pretty steady. It's normally small margins, and it's kind of a catch-all. It's safe. A CSP, every year there's a contract that's up, and over the last 2 years, some of our clients, CSPs, really got hammered because they were heavy liftgate residential. And we went from a $15 lift gate to a proposed $85 lift gate back to a blanket, right? The shipper said, we don't need any more freight. We don't want to give this CSP anymore. And so they can really knock you off pretty quickly without much leverage for the broker. So that's where they're a little more dangerous. They are aggressive. If you get a really aggressive one and you think it's too good, it is too good. And in a year, you're going to lose it.
Okay. So I guess here's my follow-up question for that. How does that time frame work? Do you lock in customer specific pricing for a set period of time, or is it just kind of at will, can cancel whenever you want?
I've been doing this 8 years, and it used to be always you get 1 year and then they start renegotiating like 9 months in. I have had a couple where the pricing team was just super aggressive. In 2019, 2018, there was a bit of a dip in trucking, and we got an FAK for some furniture that we shouldn't have gotten, an FAK 125 on some class 250 furniture. And 3 months in, they said, never mind, and just scrap the whole thing. And so I'd never seen that happen. In the last 2 years, it's happened way more off-cycle increases whenever they want to. In fact, even this year, we have a very large enterprise shipper. We took an increase on contract, renewed the contract, and they gave us another increase July 1st anyways. And they said it was from the top of their organization, right? They came down and they're like, we couldn't do anything. We have to, cost pressures. And I'm like, but the capacity is back. So I was dumbfounded by that. So it is a contract. Rarely have I seen it stuck to religiously for a year at a time, but that is a 12-month period.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the fluidity of contracts seems to be a bit of a trend in transportation, if you will.
I think so. And the blankets got hit multiple times as well. So it's not just CSPs, which is why you need both.
So I understand that you need both. What are some advantages to maybe switching to CSP pricing?
Well, so from a broker's perspective, right? And this would be me running Rocket Shipping or another broker running their business. What CSPs do for us is allow us to get into an enterprise level client that ships probably outside of our range, right? The blankets aren't competitive enough at an acceptable margin. And instead of playing the game that most brokers play, which is going in at cost, going in 5% margin, and you're not going to be able to operate on that, but you go in and then over time you move the margin up. And that's why third-party brokers have a bad name. Everybody knows that cost transparency is an issue in brokerage, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of doing it that way, we will go in super cost competitive at an unacceptable margin, and we gamble on ourselves going to get a CSP. And if we get 20% reduction, we pass 10% to the client, and we take that other 10% to get back to an acceptable margin. Client is happy. We saved them even more than what we bid them, and we have acceptable margins. And so that's one advantage, is being able to go after business that's might be out hitting your coverage a little too big of a shipper, but you can get in the door. Mm-hmm. The second advantage of CSP is retention. And it's probably the biggest advantage, is that anytime one of my clients who's on CSPs and blanket, a blended model, if they were to test us on a bid to a competitor, a standard third party, send them zip codes and data and accessorials and freight class, they would have to bid it with blanket pricing because they don't have anything specific. And so we may have a $20 residential negotiated because 90% of it's resi. Their blanket rate's a $60 residential, so they can never touch it off the bat. And so it's not even apples to apples, but it's a defense mechanism from another broker taking your business.
Okay. So from the shipper's perspective, then, is the advantage of having customer specific pricing largely pricing related? Is it just going to give you better rates, or are there other advantages for a shipper?
I think that to start, it's pricing related. Mm-hmm. But from there, I mean, if you're shipping from one warehouse and you're having trouble with dock pickups because you only got 6 doors and you want to have all these carriers in there and you're using a broker, a CSP allows you to negotiate a drop trailer or 2 spotted trailers, consolidate pickups, streamline that process. And you can do that on blanket, and you can get drop trailers on blanket. And we have customers who do that, but that carrier, that terminal manager sees it as a third party. And so the pickups are not always prioritized. The drop trailer can be pulled at any given time. When we do a drop trailer with a CSP, we sign a shipper load and count agreement, and we say, hey, it's going to be picked up at this time. Here's where the bills are going to be stacked, and it's a lot more streamlined there. So that's another advantage for a company who's rapidly scaling and running out of dock doors, which is a lot of the clients that we work with being in the e-commerce industry.
Got it. That makes sense. So when it comes to actually negotiating these rates, how do you guys do it? If a shipper has multiple brokers or third parties trying to get like customer specific pricing for them, are each of them going to come back? Are carriers going to come back with the same pricing for all of you guys, and then it's just a matter of the margin, or do you negotiate individual pricing with the carriers? Does that question make sense?
Typically, it's kind of a first come, first serve, and so it's a cutthroat industry being in brokerage. If you get an LOA, you want to submit that bid immediately, because if they're in that buying window and they're signing one with you, I always assume they're signing another. Now, that's not normally the case, but I assume that. We submit it quick, and it's all relational from there. Your relationship with your rep at your carrier that you're bidding it to, you just ask, hey, is anybody else bidding this? And oftentimes they will tell you, or they'll hint at, yeah, there may be some other interested parties. They can't say exactly what's going on, but they will not. There's two scenarios in my experience. They will either not bid more than once. They'll only authorize it to one third party, or they will give the same proposal to all of them and say, you go ahead, and then they basically wash their hands of it and say, we're going to get this business, and the shipper can figure it out with whoever they want to use as a third party bill to. The one thing that you can do to avoid that, if you're a broker, is one, have the relationship, and two, create some urgency. Dress it up to make sure that it's kind of like going on a prom date. You want to dress up and give them the best data, give them the start date, give them all the details, pictures of the freight above and beyond the LOA. And they'll bid you, the pricing team will bid it faster. And so you'll have that bid secured before the rest, because you gave them all of the info in one email. Because otherwise it drags out over 2 months of like, okay, can we have pictures now? How many warehouses? If you do it all at once, then they just bid it.
Dude, the value of being prepared.
Yeah.
It's
you
always
gotta be
there.
prepared to be ahead.
So as a shipper, I'm assuming you could just go ahead and do this on your own without going through a 3PL.
Yeah.
Is it helpful going through the 3PL rather than doing it on your own?
It depends on your freight profile. If you've got class 50 freight and you're shipping 100 pallets a day, you could do it. Anybody could go out to bid and get the pricing that you want. However, if you have freight that maybe isn't quite as attractive, using a third party is the best route, in my opinion, because I know more than they know about these carriers and which carriers want overlength freight, which ones will not want it, which ones are going to need freight in certain lanes. We have access to that data. And so instead of just kind of spraying and praying and bidding to all the carriers, we say, hey, this carrier out of California, we know they just lost this shipper and that they're going to need some revenue. We're going to bring it to them first and kind of position it as, hey, we're not going to bid this to the field. We're bidding it to you first. And so there is nuances to having data and having kind of the know of what the market's doing. And then also, if you have class 250 freight, you need a third party to bid it, because the carriers will all say no. And so they don't want to do that on a bid anyways, or they'll give you a pricing that you would never be able to analyze against other carriers. Oh, that's actually what I left out too, is that let's say you do it yourself. You don't use third party. You have to have some type of software to run all of the tariffs, because you don't just get them in like, here's your price. It's like price per mile and weight break and hundredweight, all these really, and every carrier can do it different. So you have to have a software that'll load them all in and say, overall, these 3 months of data, here's the best, here's second best, here's third. And then we run it back to them and say, you were second. Do you want more of the freight or not? So we rebid. But that's a ton of work. It's a ton of data, and you can't just do it with Excel.
Oh, I can only imagine. It sounds terrible.
Yeah, that's why nobody does it. So
yeah, like count me out. I'm full truckloads all day.
Yeah.
So you said one thing about like class 250, like a carrier is not going to quote that for a direct shipper, but they will for you guys. Can you explain that to me? Why was that the case?
Well, so they would call that ugly freight. Which would be class 250 is either really not very dense, it's super light and takes up a big footprint, or it's awkward shaped. That's typically like your kayaks or class 400, whatever, right?
Okay.
So they class them way higher so that, it's going to be a lot of revenue if they're going to move them. But in the last 2 years, and even for the next year at least, carriers have all the freight they want. in LTL, right? They have all the freight that they could want, and they can basically pick and choose. And so if you try to get a direct bid on freight that's unattractive, that they don't think will operate, or that will clog up their network, they'll just decline the bid. And we still get 20% of carriers still decline every bid we send out right now. Now, last year, it was like 95% of all the bids we sent out, the carriers just said, no, thank you. And that was with attractive freight. It is getting better, but it's certainly still the shippers, or still the carriers market to an extent, even with inflation.
Yeah, it sounds like it, man. Like I told you earlier, we intentionally keep these short so they're kind of quick and digestible. But like, I've learned a ton from you today, and from talking to you over the past like week or so about this. And I always end with this question: like, what's something that you've learned recently?
Something that I've learned recently specific to freight is that the carriers do not care about the economy anymore. They are trying to stay pricing disciplined. And so there's an article last week from JOC.com, and they anonymously interviewed a bunch of executives of these big name carriers, right? The LTL freight carriers. And all of them gave a similar answer, which was, we're going to focus on price discipline. There's more increases coming. And they are kind of in a united front on that, which is counter to almost everything in the economy: fuel prices, spot market versus contract and truckload, inventory levels, containers coming in. But LTL seems to have walled themselves off and said, we're going to continue to give marked increases and stay disciplined on pricing. That would be the first time I've seen that. So that's something that I learned. I don't know if it will turn out to be true, but I learned that last week and was a bit surprised, because in 2008, you could move freight with a carrier for free. You know, they were operating at a loss to stay in business and just take freight. In 2018, they gave crazy tariffs again, and they're normally very reactive to the economy. So I learned that apparently they're not going to react to the economy regardless of recession or inflation.
Interesting. All right, man. I learned a bunch from you today. Like I said, I'm not an LTL guy. I could listen to you talk about this for hours, but I'm trying to cut these off around 15, 20 minutes. So Gabe, like, if someone wants to reach out to you, like, how do they do it?
LinkedIn. I'm active on there every day. You can look me up by my name or by Rocket Shipping and find some shared posts, whatever it may be. If you send me a DM, I'll reply that same day. So I just treat it like a text message.
All right. Perfect, Gabe. Thanks again for being on. Looking forward to seeing a lot more from you and the group at Rocket Shipping.
Appreciate it. Thanks.